Jake Miller's hands gripped the control stick as his small salvage ship drifted through the black emptiness of space. 15 years ago he'd been a Marine fighting battles in places most people never heard about. Now he was just another scavenger, picking through the bones of abandoned stations and derelict ships, trying to make enough credits to survive another month. But this job was different. This was supposed to be the big one. The coordinates had come from an old information broker named Tommy Reed, a guy who owed Jake a favor from way back. Tommy had been dying, cancer eating through his lungs, and he'd given Jake these numbers as a final payment. "Trust me, Miller," Tommy had wheezed. "This one's worth something. Just be careful." Now Jake understood why Tommy had looked so worried. Waypoint Theta 7 appeared in his viewport like a ghost from another era. The station was massive, easily 10 times bigger than anything Jake had salvaged before. It was military grade, that much was obvious from the reinforced hull plating and the weapon hardpoints jutting from its surface like metal thorns. The thing orbited a dead planet, a brown and gray ball of rock that had probably been beautiful once, maybe a million years ago. Jake ran his scanner over the station. No power signatures. No life signs. No distress beacons. The place had been sitting here in the dark for who knew how long, just waiting. The registration codes came back blank. According to official records, this station didn't exist. That should have been his first warning to turn around and leave. But Jake had 40 credits left in his account and 3 months of overdue docking fees waiting for him back at Port Nelson. He needed this. He brought his ship alongside the main airlock and engaged the docking clamps. The metal groaned as the two vessels connected, and Jake held his breath, half expecting the ancient machinery to fail. But the seals held and the airlock cycled open with a hiss of stale air. Jake grabbed his rifle, an old Marine Corps standard issue that he'd kept when he mustered out. He checked the magazine, chambered around, and stepped through the airlock into complete darkness. His boots made hollow sounds on the metal floor. Jake flicked on his helmet light, and the beam cut through the black like a knife. Emergency systems kicked in somewhere deep in the station, and dim red lights began to glow along the corridor walls. The air smelled wrong, recycled and dead like nobody had breathed it in decades. He moved forward, rifle up, checking corners the way they'd taught him in basic training. Every instinct he'd developed in 10 years of combat was screaming at him to be careful. This place felt wrong. The corridors were empty. Not just empty but cleaned out. No bodies. No bloodstains. No signs of fighting or panic. Just abandoned equipment and empty rooms. Whoever had been here had left in a hurry, but they'd taken everything important with them. Almost everything. Jake found the command center 20 minutes later, a large circular room filled with computer terminals and display screens. Everything was powered down and covered in a thin layer of dust. He found the main power control and pulled the lever. The station groaned like a sleeping giant waking up. Lights flickered overhead. Computer banks hummed and clicked as they came online. Display screens lit up with scrolling data that Jake couldn't read. But one screen in the center of the room activated automatically, and a face appeared. It was a military officer, an admiral from the looks of his uniform. The man was old, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. The recording was poor quality, the image flickering and distorted. "If you're seeing this, then you've found what we tried to hide," the admiral said. His voice was urgent, almost desperate. "The agreement must never be discovered. They trusted us and we..." The recording dissolved into static, the admiral's face breaking apart into digital noise. Jake tried to restart it, but the file was corrupted beyond repair. Only those few seconds had survived. Jake stood in the silence of the command center, his mind racing. An agreement. Someone had trusted someone else. And whatever had happened, it was bad enough that they'd abandoned an entire military station to keep it secret. He pulled out his portable storage drive and plugged it into the main computer. Files began downloading, thousands of them encrypted and classified. Jake's hands were shaking slightly as he watched the progress bar climb. Whatever was on this station, people had wanted it buried. And if Tommy Reed's worried expression was any indication, people might still want it buried. His ship's proximity alarm suddenly shrieked through his helmet comm. Jake's blood went cold. 3 contacts had just entered the system, moving fast, heading straight for the station. Someone knew he was here. Jake barely slept for the next 3 days. He'd moved his ship to the far side of the station, hiding in the shadow of the massive structure, and set up camp in the command center. His portable heater fought against the cold of the dead station, and he lived on protein bars and recycled water while he worked. The files were a nightmare to crack. Whoever had encrypted them knew what they were doing. Military-grade security, the kind of stuff Jake had only seen once or twice during his intelligence work in the Marines. But he'd always been good with computers, better than most, and he had time. All the time in the world, sitting alone in the dark. The first file he cracked was a manifest. Just a list of supplies and personnel, nothing special. 14 human officers and scientists, assigned to Waypoint Theta, 7 for diplomatic operations. The date was 30 years old. Diplomatic operations. That was interesting. Jake had never heard of humans doing diplomatic work this far out in the Outer Rim. The second file was a species profile. That's when Jake first saw the word, Koresh. According to the file, the Koresh had been an alien species that lived in this sector 200 years ago. The profile showed images of them, humanoid creatures with skin that seemed to shimmer in different colors, with large eyes and delicate features. They'd been scientists and artists, a peaceful people who'd never developed weapons of war. The file said they'd gone extinct from a plague that swept through their worlds, killing every last one of them in a matter of months. Jake had heard about the Koresh before vaguely. History class stuff. One of the dead races that humans had found evidence of when they'd started exploring this part of space. Nobody thought much about them anymore. But why would a military station have classified files about a species that had been dead for 2 centuries? The third file gave him the first hint. It was a communication log between the station and Federation Command, dated during the war with the VRWN Empire. Jake remembered that war. He'd been a kid when it happened, but everyone knew about it. Humanity had nearly lost. The VRWN had been bigger, stronger, more advanced. For 5 years, it had looked like humans might actually be wiped out. The log talked about an agreement. An alliance. Jake's hands stopped moving on the keyboard as he read. The Koresh hadn't been extinct during the war. They'd been alive, hiding in this sector, and they'd reached out to humanity. They'd offered help. Jake opened more files, faster now, his heart pounding. The picture came together like a puzzle made of razors. The Koresh had given humans something during the war. Biological weapons technology. Diseases that could target VRYNN biology specifically, plagues that could sweep through their ships and colonies. It was brutal, horrifying stuff, but it had worked. Humanity had won the war because the VRYNN had started dying faster than they could fight. In exchange, the Koresh had asked for only one thing: protection. They were a small species, barely a few million individuals spread across 3 worlds. They wanted humanity to defend them if anyone ever threatened them. It seemed like a fair deal. But then Jake found the command directive, dated 6 months after the war ended. His blood turned to ice as he read it. The Federation leadership had decided the Koresh were a problem. They knew too much about humanity's willingness to use biological weapons. They'd seen humans at their darkest, most desperate hour. They knew what humans were capable of when survival was on the line. And the Koresh were witnesses to war crimes that could never be made public. The directive was clear: eliminate the threat. Make it look natural. Jake opened the mission reports with shaking hands. He didn't want to read them, but he couldn't stop himself. Human special forces had been sent to the Koresh worlds. They'd carried the same biological weapons the Koresh had helped create, modified to target Koresh biology. They'd released the plague in population centers and water supplies in the air itself. The reports were clinical, professional. They talked about infection rates and mortality percentages like they were discussing crop yields. Within 3 months, every Koresh world had gone silent. Within 6 months, the species had been declared extinct. The official story was a natural plague, a tragic accident of nature. But it hadn't been nature. It had been murder. Jake found himself standing, backing away from the computer like it might bite him. He felt sick to his stomach. This wasn't just a crime. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was genocide, planned and executed by his own government, against a species that had trusted humans enough to save them from destruction. The final files detailed the cover-up. Waypoint Theta 7 had been the coordination point for the Alliance. When the genocide was complete, the Federation had ordered the station abandoned. But some of the personnel stationed here had refused to go quietly. They'd objected, threatened to go public with the truth. So the station had been wiped from all records, left to drift in the darkness, and the personnel had been reassigned to posts where they'd never be heard from again. Jake sat back down heavily in the command chair. His hands were shaking. 15 years he'd served. 15 years he'd believed he was fighting for something good, something worth dying for. And all that time his government had been capable of this. His proximity alarm suddenly screamed, jerking him back to reality. Jake's head snapped up to the scanner display. 3 ships had just entered the system. Military configurations. Stealth plating. Moving fast and heading directly for his position. They weren't here by accident. Someone had been monitoring the station. Someone knew he'd found the truth, and they were coming to make sure it stayed buried. Jake had maybe 20 minutes before those ships arrived. He ran through the station's corridors, his boots pounding on metal floors, heading for the defense control room. His Marine training kicked in automatically, his mind already planning defensive positions and fallback points. The defense grid was older than dirt, but it still had power. Jake's fingers flew across the controls, bringing weapon systems online one by one. Automated turrets, blast doors, pressure locks. He turned the entire station into a maze of death traps, channeling any attackers into kill zones where he'd have the advantage. But even as he worked, Jake knew it wasn't enough. 3 military ships against 1 ex-Marine with a rifle and some old turrets? Those weren't good odds. He needed something more. He needed information about this station, something he could use. Jake pulled up the station schematic on his portable scanner and started moving through sections he hadn't explored yet. Storage bay empty. Weapons locker already stripped. Communications array, useless without a ship to relay through. Medical bay probably nothing but... His scanner pinged. Power signature. Something in the medical bay was still running. Jake changed direction, moving fast but careful. The medical bay was 3 levels down, through corridors that hadn't seen light in 30 years. His helmet lamp cut through the darkness, reflecting off windows of empty examination rooms and abandoned surgical equipment. Then he found it. In the back corner of the bay, behind a sealed door marked long-term care, a single cryogenic pod hummed with power. The emergency battery had kept it running for 3 decades, draining power so slowly that it had outlasted everything else on the station. Jake approached carefully, wiping frost from the viewing window. His breath caught in his throat. There was someone inside. Something inside. The being was roughly human-shaped, but that's where the similarity ended. Its skin shimmered with colors that seemed to shift even in the frozen state, like oil on water. It had 4 fingers on each hand instead of 5, and its face was delicate, almost fragile-looking, with large eyes closed in frozen sleep. The body was thin, wrapped in some kind of medical gown that had probably been white once. Jake found the nameplate on the pod's control panel. Belsera. Species, Koresh. Position, scientific delegate. His heart hammered in his chest. This was impossible. The Koresh were extinct. Every single one of them had died 200 years ago. Except this one hadn't. Someone had frozen her, put her in this pod, and left her here in the dark. Jake checked his scanner. The 3 ships would be docking in 12 minutes. He should leave her. He should run, try to escape, save himself. Waking her up was crazy. She might be hostile. She might be insane from decades of frozen sleep. She might. He hit the revival sequence. The pod began to warm, ice crystals melting and draining away. Chemical stimulants flooded into the body through tubes Jake couldn't see. It took 5 minutes, the longest 5 minutes of Jake's life, listening to his proximity alarm count down the arrival of the kill team. Then her eyes opened. They were completely black, like pools of deep water, and they were filled with absolute terror. The pod hissed open. Belsera tried to scramble backward, but her muscles weren't working right yet after 30 years frozen. She fell against the back of the pod, her mouth opening in what might have been a scream, except no sound came out. A device on her neck, some kind of implant, suddenly crackled to life. Please, the translation came through, mechanical and cold but carrying the emotion underneath. Please don't hurt me. I'll tell you anything. Please. Jake holstered his rifle immediately, holding up both hands. I'm not going to hurt you, he said. My name is Jake Miller. I'm not with the military. I'm just a salvage operator who found this station. Belsera stared at him, her whole body shaking. Human, she whispered. You're human. Yeah, Jake said. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what my people did to yours. That seemed to break something in her. Tears started flowing from those black eyes and she collapsed forward. Jake caught her, supporting her weight as 3 decades of grief poured out of her. Between sobs, she told him her story. Some of the humans stationed here had objected to the genocide. They couldn't stop it, couldn't save the Koresh worlds, but they'd saved her. A scientist named Patterson and a medic named Williams had frozen her in secret, hoping that someday someone would find her and the truth could come out. They said my people gave humanity more than weapons, Belsera said, her voice steadier now. We shared our greatest discovery. The cure for cellular aging. Your cells could regenerate forever, never breaking down. You could live for thousands of years. That's what your leaders really wanted. They wanted immortality, and they wanted to be the only species in the galaxy to have it. Jake felt sick all over again. Genocide for eternal life. That's what it had come down to. His proximity alarm shrieked. The ships were docking. He could hear the clamps engaging through the station's hull, metal grinding against metal. Jake made his decision in a heartbeat. He pulled out his portable drive and accessed the station's communication array. Every file, every piece of evidence, everything he'd found, he uploaded it all to a broadcast package. Then he set a timer. 6 hours. In 6 hours, this information would transmit on every emergency frequency, every military channel, every civilian network. The entire Federation would know what their government had done. They're coming for us, Jake said. The people who did this. They're here to keep the secret buried. He looked at Velsera. Can you fight? She wiped her eyes. For a moment she looked fragile, broken by loss and time. Then something changed in her expression. Her back straightened. Her black eyes hardened. I watched my entire species die, Velsera said quietly. Every friend I ever had. Every member of my family. My whole civilization turned to dust because we trusted the wrong people. Yes, human. I can fight. The first explosion ripped through the outer docking bay 3 minutes after the ships attached. Jake felt it through his boots, a deep rumble that shook the entire station. They weren't wasting time. Stay behind me, Jake told Velsera, moving quickly through the corridors toward his first defensive position. He'd chosen a junction point where 3 hallways met, with blast doors he could control and a clear line of sight in 3 directions. Velsera's hands flew across a wall panel, her 4 fingers moving faster than Jake's eyes could follow. I'm sealing sectors behind us, she said. They'll have to cut through or go the long way around. Good. Buy us time. The attackers came fast and professional. Jake saw the first one through his rifle scope, a figure in black tactical gear moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Special operations. Probably disavowed for this mission, no official records, no backup. If they died here, nobody would even know their names. Jake didn't hesitate. He'd learned a long time ago that hesitation got you killed. He squeezed the trigger. The operative went down. The others immediately scattered, taking cover and returning fire. Energy bolts scorched the walls around Jake's position, and he ducked back, breathing hard. These weren't amateurs. They moved like water, covering each other, advancing in coordinated bursts. But Jake had been fighting in close quarters since before some of these operators were born. He knew how to use terrain, how to make every corner a potential death trap. He fell back to his second position, triggering a blast door that slammed shut between him and the attackers. They'd have to cut through it and that would take time. Can you vent the atmosphere in Section C? Jake asked Velsera. She was already working on it. Overriding safety protocols now. Her translator implant made her voice sound mechanical, but Jake could hear the determination underneath. Done. Section C is vacuum. Jake heard screaming through the station's walls as the air rushed out of that section. 2 more operatives down, maybe 3. He felt sick about it, but he pushed the feeling away. They'd come here to kill him and Velsera. They'd come here to bury the truth. This was survival. The attackers adapted quickly, putting on vacuum suits and continuing their advance through different routes. Jake caught one in a crossfire at a T-junction, the operative going down hard. Another one almost got him, coming through a ventilation shaft Jake hadn't expected them to use. Only Velsera's warning saved him, her sharp cry giving him just enough time to spin and fire. 4 down. Maybe 5 if he'd counted right. How many had there been to start? 10? 12? Jake was losing track in the chaos. Then the comm crackled and a woman's voice came through, calm and professional. Miller. Jake Miller. My name is Commander Hayes. I'm calling a ceasefire. Jake stayed behind cover, his rifle aimed at the corridor entrance. I've got nothing to say to you, Commander. I think you do. Hayes's voice was tired, worn down by something more than just this fight. I know what you found on this station. I know what you're planning to do with those files. I'm asking you to stop. Not happening. There was a pause. Jake could hear Hayes breathing on the other end, like she was gathering courage for what came next. I was stationed here 30 years ago, she said finally. Junior officer, fresh out of training. They gave us orders. We followed them. We did things. Her voice broke slightly. We did things that I've lived with every single day since. Jake's grip on his rifle tightened. You were part of the genocide. Yes. Velsera made a sound beside him, something that the translator couldn't interpret. Pain maybe. Or rage. Then you know why I can't let this stay buried, Jake said. I know why you think you have to broadcast those files, Hayes countered. But listen to me, Miller. If that information goes public, the Federation will tear itself apart. There will be riots, rebellions, civil war. Billions of people will die fighting over something that happened 3 decades ago. Is that really worth it? Is one extinct species worth destroying human civilization? Jake looked at Valsera. Her iridescent skin had gone pale, and her black eyes were fixed on the comm unit like she could see Hayes through it. My people had a word, Valsera said softly. Tell Nara. It means strength through unity with those who are different from us. We trusted humans because we saw your potential for honor, for being better than your worst instincts. We died because we were wrong about you. Her words hit Jake harder than any of the energy bolts that had been flying around. He checked his wrist display. 2 hours left until the broadcast. 2 hours until the truth went out to everyone. Some truths are worth the cost, Commander, Jake said into the comm. If your civilization can't survive knowing what it did, then maybe it doesn't deserve to survive. The silence that followed was heavy, cold. When Hayes spoke again, all the weariness was gone from her voice. It was pure military precision, the tone of someone who just received an order they intended to carry out. Then you're both dead, Miller. We're coming for you, and we won't stop until this station is nothing but debris. The comm went silent. Jake could hear movement in the corridors now, multiple contacts, the attackers regrouping for a final assault. He looked at Valsera. She looked back at him with those endless black eyes. 2 hours, Jake said. We just need to hold them for 2 more hours. Valsera picked up a piece of debris, a metal pipe that had broken free from the wall. It wasn't much of a weapon, but the way she held it made Jake think she knew how to use it. Then let's hold the line, she said. Jake's hands were shaking as he accessed the station's main control systems. They were down to 40 minutes before the broadcast, and Hayes' team was closing in. He could hear them cutting through the blast doors, the whine of plasma torches echoing through the corridors. We're not going to make it, Valsera said quietly. She was bleeding from a cut on her arm where a piece of shrapnel had caught her during the last firefight. Her iridescent skin had lost some of its shimmer, dulled by exhaustion and pain. Jake stared at the control panel in front of him. One option kept flashing at him, red and urgent. Station self-destruct protocol. It was a last resort, meant to prevent the station from falling into enemy hands. He'd never actually use it, the explosion would kill them along with everyone else, but Hayes didn't know that. I've got an idea, Jake said. It's crazy, but it might work. He activated the self-destruct sequence. Alarms immediately started blaring throughout the station, red emergency lights flashing in every corridor. A computerized voice began counting down, self-destruct activated. 10 minutes to core breach. All personnel evacuate immediately. The sound of plasma torches suddenly stopped. Jake could hear confused voices over the comm, operatives asking Hayes what they should do. It's a bluff, Hayes' voice came back, but there was uncertainty in it. Keep cutting. Station's been abandoned for 30 years, Commander, one of the operatives replied. If that reactor goes critical, we won't make it back to the ships in time. Self-destruct in 9 minutes, the computer announced cheerfully. Jake grabbed Valsera's hand. Come on. We need to get to my ship. They ran through corridors Jake had memorized over the past 3 days, taking routes the attackers wouldn't know. Behind them, they could hear Hayes' team falling back, their discipline breaking as the countdown continued. Survival instinct was stronger than orders, even for special operations. They reached Jake's ship in the docking bay with 6 minutes left on the countdown. Jake was getting the engines warmed up when he saw her. Commander Hayes, standing alone by the airlock, her weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. Go ahead, Jake said to Valsera. Get the ship ready to launch. Jake. I'll be right there. Jake stepped out of the ship, his own rifle slung over his shoulder but not in his hands. Hayes looked older than he'd expected, maybe 50, with gray streaking through her dark hair. Her face was lined with exhaustion and something deeper. Guilt maybe. Regret. Self-destruct in 5 minutes, the computer announced. Your team's gone, Jake said. Their ships undocked 2 minutes ago. It's just you now. Hayes nodded slowly. I know. I told them to go. She looked at Valsera, who was visible through the ship's viewport. I had a daughter, Hayes said, her voice cracking. Her name was Rebecca. She was 8 years old when she got diagnosed with cellular degeneration. The doctors said there was no cure, that her cells were just breaking down and there was nothing they could do about it. Valsera stepped out of the ship, moving to stand beside Jake. Hayes raised her weapon slightly, then lowered it again. She died when she was 12, Hayes continued. Tears were streaming down her face now. 4 years of watching my little girl waste away, getting weaker every day, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. She looked directly at Valsera. Your people could have saved her. The cure for cellular aging would have fixed her condition completely. But I helped kill your species. I helped destroy the only people in the galaxy who could have cured my daughter. The weight of that confession hung in the air between them. Jake could see Valsera's expression shift, the anger in her eyes mixing with something else. Pity maybe. Understanding. Self-destruct in 3 minutes, the computer said. Valsera stepped forward, closer to Hayes. Then honor her memory, she said softly. Let the truth live. Let people know what was lost. Make sure no one ever does this again. Hayes stood there for a long moment, weapon in her hand, the power to stop everything right there in front of her. Then, slowly she lowered the gun completely. Get out of here, Hayes said. Both of you. Go. Jake and Valsera didn't wait. They ran back to the ship and Jake fired the engines. The docking clamps released and they pulled away from the station just as the countdown hit 0. Nothing exploded. The station just kept floating there in the dark, alarms still blaring uselessly. As they cleared the station's mass shadow, Jake's computer pinged. The broadcast had begun. 6 hours of waiting had passed in what felt like minutes. Now every piece of evidence, every file, every recording was flooding across Federation networks. They watched on the ship's screens as the news feeds lit up. Initial confusion gave way to shock, then outrage. Some called it fake, a hoax. But others recognized the authentication codes, the military signatures that couldn't be forged. Protests erupted on core worlds. Politicians scrambled to respond. The military went into lockdown mode. The Federation didn't collapse, not immediately. But it cracked, splitting into factions. Those demanding accountability and justice versus those defending the old order, claiming it had been necessary for survival. 6 months later, Jake and Valsera had settled on a frontier colony called New Hope. It was a small place, mostly farmers and miners, people who didn't care much about politics. They'd welcomed Valsera without question, fascinated by the living representative of a species they'd thought was extinct. The real miracle came from the research labs. Scientists had found Koresh DNA samples stored in facilities across Federation space, preserved for study. They'd been working on something impossible, revival. Cloning from preserved genetic material, growing new Koresh from the fragments of the old. It would take years, maybe decades, but Valsera's people might live again. Commander Hayes had turned herself in 3 days after the broadcast. Her testimony had corroborated everything, and now she was serving a life sentence. But her confession had started something, a wave of other participants coming forward, unable to live with the secret anymore. Jake stood at the edge of the settlement, watching Valsera teach a group of human children about Koresh culture. Her voice carried across the open ground, talking about Telnara, about strength through unity. The kids listened with wide eyes, asking questions that she answered with infinite patience. One ex-Marine and one survivor had gone up against an empire's darkest secret. They hadn't won completely. The Federation was still fractured, still fighting over what to do about the past. But they'd proven something important. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't its weapons or its willingness to do terrible things for survival. It was the courage to face those terrible things afterward, to admit fault and to choose to be better. Some alliances were worth fighting for, even 30 years too late. Some truths were worth any cost. And some sins could only be redeemed by refusing to let them stay buried in the dark.